so, you know how it goes. The crowd around us tactfully looked away. Only the guy I'd been designated to ask hadn't looked up the entire time. With my friends behind me watching closely, I had no choice but to ask again, "Can I?" Finally. He raised his head and looked at me steadily. There was an intensity in his gaze, almost like a lion locking onto its prey after going hungry for too long, eyes gleaming with a certain hunger. I felt a bit unsettled. For someone who looked every bit the gentleman, a reserved kind of handsome who even toasted with an air of quiet elegance, that look in his eyes felt strange. Afraid he'd refuse, I softened my tone. "Come on. Just help me out." I rarely asked so sweetly, but it was nearly foolproof when I did. Sure enough, he nodded, his voice low and slightly rough. "All right." He took out his phone, opened his social media app, and as if making some major decision, slowly held the screen out to me. After adding his social account, I realized I didn't get the usual friend request prompt. Instead, I could send him a message directly. So, we were already friends on my phone? I glanced at him in confusion, hesitated, then opened our chat. The screen filled with messages, all from him. "Henry, happy birthday." "Henry, Merry Christmas." "Henry, Happy New Year." As I scrolled down, I found more of his messages, spanning each holiday and birthday year after year. The messages stopped at 2015. A strange feeling tightened in my chest. The guy my friends had dubbed the perfect blend of innocence and allure had been my friend since sophomore year of high school. I looked up at him. He was looking at me too, with a mix of shyness and determination in his eyes. And in that moment, I understood he liked me. One of my friends grabbed my shoulders from behind, bursting with excitement. "What took so long? Did you get his contact or not?" Hiding my nervousness, I locked my screen and replied calmly, "Got it." She pulled me away, bubbling with gossip, and as I glanced back one last time, I saw him lower his gaze as if nothing had happened. I raised my phone with a slight smile and called, "Thanks." The party ended, and a light rain was falling from the sky. I was sitting on a couch in the lobby, waiting for someone to pick me up, when I saw the group from the next table burst out of the venue. They were loud, filling the quiet lobby with a sudden liveliness. One of them noticed me and nudged the handsome guy, gesturing for him to look my way. But he didn't even glance over, heading straight to the counter to settle the bill. After he finished, he asked the front desk for an umbrella, then casually walked over to me and set it on the coffee table in front of me. "I'm waiting for my boyfriend." He froze for a second but still left the umbrella there. Standing up, he said, "That doesn't change anything." As he turned to leave, I quickly called out, "What's your name?" "Henry Lee," he replied. That name sounded familiar more than once, in fact. He was the academic genius of our high school, always ranking number 1. The kind of student teachers adored and even other top students looked up to. But I vaguely remembered that his face on the honor roll didn't look like this. I messaged my best friend for help, and she promptly sent me Henry's high school photo. I studied it carefully. The features were mostly the same, but his entire demeanor was different. Back then, he had the typical studious look, his eyes a bit blank, like a bookworm. Now, though, he'd shed that youthful awkwardness, growing into striking good looks. The thin-framed glasses on his face added a refined, almost untouchable quality, and his every movement exuded an effortlessly compelling charm. No wonder he'd caught our attention the moment he sat down. I marveled at how much he'd changed, then glanced at my phone. 20 minutes had passed, and my boyfriend still hadn't arrived. I stood up and went to the entrance to wait. Instead of my boyfriend, I spotted Henry standing alone beneath a tree not far off. It seemed his friends had already left. The moment he saw me, he shifted slightly behind the trunk, as if trying not to be noticed. And suddenly, I understood he was waiting for me. Clutching the umbrella, I walked toward him. "Were you waiting for me to return this?" Caught off guard, he hesitated. "No. Then why are you still here when the rain stopped? He didn't respond. So I asked directly, if you like me, why haven't you told me? Judging by our message history, he'd liked me for quite some time. He said meaningfully, you have a boyfriend. There's always someone, he replied. Almost resignedly. I didn't think that was an excuse. Plenty of people know I have a boyfriend but still confess their feelings. He stayed silent. At that moment, a sports car whizzed by, grazing past me. He instinctively pulled me into his arms, urgently whispering, careful. I could feel the rapid rise and fall of his chest, as if he'd been shaken. Held close, I could only look forward. The sports car had pulled up in front of the club. And the driver and passenger were locked in a passionate kiss. After a while, the passenger door opened, and a tall, long-legged man stepped out. My boyfriend. Or should I say, ex-boyfriend now. He pulled out his phone and, looking down, dialed a number. The phone in my hand lit up, displaying his call. I answered, and his voice, warm and doting, came through. Baby, I'm here. Where are you? You can get back in the car and keep kissing. We're done. There was a brief silence. He looked around in confusion, and I hung up right then. I turned to Henry. He looked like he was holding back a smile, though his lips were tightly pressed. I said, well, I don't have a boyfriend now. His expression shifted, and he asked seriously, then, can I pursue you? The guy who said he wanted to pursue me? Days passed. And there wasn't a peep from him. Every day, my best friend pestered me for updates. By the end, she was more anxious than I was. Are all these academic types this repressed? Not necessarily, I replied. The last guy I dated was a top student, and he was definitely proactive. She snickered. You make it sound like you're a heartbreaker. I rolled onto my bed with a relaxed smile. Wasn't it you who said I'd be wasting this face if I didn't date a few more people? She perked up. So, does that mean our high school's Henry has a shot with you? That depends on him. But seriously, what's up with Jake? She continued, I honestly didn't expect him to cheat. Back when he was trying to win you over. He would have done anything you asked, even if you told him to go jump off a cliff. I couldn't help but laugh, and after a good chuckle, I replied, he says he's got a sugar mama lined up to support me. She laughed too. Is sugar mommy okay with that? No idea. But I'm definitely not. We chatted for a while longer, and just before hanging up, she reminded me. You should really watch out for Jake. I don't think he'll let this go so easily. I know. Jake certainly wasn't the type to back down quietly. But he was the one making out with someone else in a car, so it felt like I had nothing to worry about. The next day, I went to work as usual. Just before the end of the day, I got a message from Henry, who'd been silent all this time. Henry, can I take you out for dinner tonight? Seeing that short message filled me with a strange, almost triumphant thrill, like I'd been waiting for him to finally make a move. Even though, in the beginning, I didn't feel much for him. It made me wonder if this was part of his strategy. If he'd pursued me like anyone else asking me out the next day, I probably wouldn't have given it a second thought. But his deliberate, tantalizing pace, plus that near mortifying reunion, had me actually looking forward to our interactions. I replied without hesitation, sure. His response came immediately, I'm waiting downstairs by your office. Let me know when you're ready. One eyebrow arched in surprise. Did I tell you where I work? But he didn't reply again. I couldn't help but laugh. Every time I asked something crucial, he'd go silent. He truly had perfected the art of playing dead. Finally, the workday ended. And I grabbed my bag to head downstairs. Henry was waiting by his car. He leaned against it, dressed in a crisp white shirt and black slacks, with that refined, almost aristocratic face of his. He exuded a restrained yet unmistakable allure, just like his car, understated yet luxurious. He opened the door for me, his tone polite as he asked, "Any preference for dinner?" I eyed him with a smile. "Doesn't make sense, though. You know where I work. So I'd think you'd know what I like to eat." He froze for a second, suppressing a smile before answering honestly, "I do." "So, Miller's, then? I've already made reservations." I nodded. As we drove toward the restaurant, he explained, "One of my projects ran into a last-minute issue. I've been tied up these past few days." Understanding dawned on me. I was starting to think it was on purpose. On purpose how? To keep me waiting. He gave me a serious look. Never. Once we arrived, the waiter led us to a table by the window. We had just sat down and started looking at the menu when an overly cheerful voice called out behind me, "Vanessa, is that you?" I looked up to see my ex, the top student from high school. He grinned like he'd won the lottery. "I knew if I came here, I'd see you. You never got tired of this place back then." He kept rambling, leaving me mortified, especially with Henry sitting right there. My ex finally seemed to notice Henry, his expression changing. Tilting his head, he asked, "Is he your boyfriend?" "No," I answered. For some reason, he slung an arm over Henry's shoulder, speaking like an elder bestowing wisdom. "Bro, listen to me. Just quit while you're ahead. Look at me, I broke up with her 2 years ago. And I still haven't gotten over it. She's nothing but trouble. Trust me, you're better off letting her go." Henry calmly brushed his hand off, looking up with a quiet authority. "Your friend's waiting for you." My ex glanced back, muttered a few more empty words, and walked away. An awkward silence fell between us. I studied Henry's face and asked tentatively, "So, should you take his advice?" Henry had picked up his napkin to wipe his hands, focusing on the one that had just touched my ex's. He looked up at me, calm but unwavering, and replied, 7 years. How could I stop now? After that, the atmosphere remained comfortably easy. Henry wasn't overly talkative, but he had a way with words, each line delivered with just the right touch. I guessed his emotional intelligence was pretty decent. From our small talk, I got a clearer picture of Henry. He'd graduated from a top university and co-founded an AI company with an upperclassman. They were doing well, having recently signed a major deal. "It was the night we celebrated the big contract when you approached me," he said. I instantly recalled that night and asked, intrigued, "What were you thinking when I came over to ask for your contact?" Again, silence. He was back to playing dead. But this time, I didn't plan to let him off so easily. "Were you nervous?" I prompted. "I was thinking," he finally spoke, his tone a bit muffled, "that you really didn't remember me." Even though I hadn't done anything wrong, I felt inexplicably guilty, as if I'd been heartless. I decided to explain, "You've changed a lot. The way I remember you back in high school, well, the top student didn't look like this, so I just..." His face fell slightly at my explanation. So I quickly added, "But the moment you mentioned Henry, I remembered you. You were amazing, I've never forgotten that. And," I added in a softer voice, "you're really handsome now." He gave a slight, faint smile. "I know. I don't blame you. But I do blame myself," he said, lifting his eyes thoughtfully, "for not being memorable enough to catch your attention back then." Our eyes met, and my heart skipped a beat. I decided to retract my earlier judgment that Henry wasn't good at making moves. Based on tonight, he was way more charming than my ex-previous top student boyfriend. After dinner, Henry offered to drive me home. As we approached my neighborhood, he suddenly pulled the car over. Puzzled, I asked, "What's wrong?" He pointed toward a tall figure in the distance. "Isn't that your ex?" I followed his gaze, and, sure enough, it was Jake. Half hidden behind a tree, his profile illuminated under the streetlight, he was shrouded in darkness. If you didn't look closely, you'd hardly notice him. I nodded, confirming. Henry continued staring at him. I was about to ask what he was thinking when he spoke again. What's he holding in his hand? I squinted, unable to make out much. But I had a guess. Probably a knife. He has a habit of flipping one around when he's bored. Henry looked at me in shock. Sensing his misunderstanding, I clarified, it's a butterfly knife, he's just into knife tricks. A knife is a knife. It can still hurt someone, he said. I doubt he'd actually. I trailed off, remembering my best friend's warning, feeling unable to finish the sentence. I looked into your ex, so I'd feel more reassured if I stayed. Henry said matter-of-factly. He's had a run-in with the police before over an assault. Jake's previous incident was over jealousy. That's what I wanted to say until it dawned on me that, right now, Henry and I showing up together was precisely the kind of situation that could spark Jake's jealousy. Or, Henry said, his voice suddenly dry, do you want to get out and talk things through with him? Seeing me hesitate, he added. I'll go with you. Do you think you could take him in a fight? Not sure, he replied, but I can protect you. That line made the idea of getting out of the car feel like a terrible choice. As I wavered, my phone rang. The caller ID flashed Jake's name. I glanced up, he'd stepped out of the shadows. Jake held his phone in one hand, his gaze fixed intensely on our car, while his other hand twirled the knife with unsettling ease. The blade's sharp tip skimmed dangerously close to his fingers, the flashy yet chilling display made all the more intimidating by his cold expression. Fear struck me as an afterthought, and I stammered, what should we do now? Henry barely paused before slamming his foot on the gas, decisive and swift. We're going to my place. By the time I got to Henry's place, it was already 10 o'clock. Just as I stepped into the elevator, my phone buzzed with a message from my best friend. Jake called me several times. Are you okay? Jake had been calling nonstop on the way here. I was so annoyed that I finally blocked him, but I didn't think he'd start pestering my friend too. I texted back to say I was fine and filled her in on the evening's events, suggesting she block him as well. She replied almost immediately. And her messages kept coming in rapid fire. The steady stream of notifications caught Henry's attention, making him glance my way a few times. My friend was clearly furious, so I focused on calming her down, barely noticing Henry's reaction as we walked. When we finally got inside, Henry handed me a pen and paper. Looks like you're staying over. Write down anything you might need, and I'll go get it. Still busy with my messages. I absent-mindedly replied, oh, I can just make do. Make do with everything? He looked pointedly at my phone, his voice tight. You have that much to talk about with your ex? I paused, holding up my phone. I'm chatting with Susan, my best friend. He rubbed the bridge of his nose, looking a little embarrassed. Sorry. No problem. I put my phone down and quickly wrote out a list of essentials, handing it to him with a genuine thank you. Henry took the list, looking slightly sheepish. Just as he was about to leave, my friend started a video call. Henry froze, glancing curiously before hesitating and looking away. I was about to explain, but he left without a word. When I answered, my friend let out a long sigh. I was starting to think Jake had gone after you. Where are you? She stared wide-eyed at the room in the background. Henry's place, I said slowly. She fell silent, then shrieked in excitement. Once the glee subsided, she launched into a full-on interrogation about Henry and our relationship, declaring that she could finally relax knowing he was there to protect me. I couldn't get a word in edgewise. She was like a superfan, obsessed with this new couple in her head and ignoring everything I tried to say. When Henry returned, I was still caught up in her enthusiastic chatter, feeling a little awkward. He handed me a bag with a short. Some stores were closed, so I picked up a few substitutes. No worries. He helped me get settled, even preparing the bath, setting out slippers, and making up the guest bed. When I came out of the bathroom, he'd even laid out a couple of books I'd once mentioned on social media. His attentiveness was impossible to ignore. I looked at him sincerely, Thank you so much for everything tonight. You know I have my reasons, he replied. That level of honesty left me a little speechless. While Henry took a shower, I sat in the living room watching a high school rom-com. The story of a brilliant male lead and a clumsy female lead was surprisingly entertaining, though my mind kept wandering to Henry. When the male lead rejected the heroine, saying he had to focus on his studies, I found myself thinking maybe dating Henry wouldn't be the worst idea. Just then, my phone rang an unknown number. I answered, only to hear Jake on the other end. Exasperated, I snapped, "What do you want?" "Who's that guy?" he demanded. "None of your business." "Babe, give me one more chance." "I'll do anything you want," he pleaded, his voice full of desperation. "I just want to give you a better life." I had nothing left to say to him. "I really do love you, no one could love you more than I do." I couldn't stand to listen to this any longer. I turned my head in silence, and suddenly noticed that Henry had finished his shower and was sitting next to me. He was dressed in simple loungewear, his hair still damp, focused on peeling an orange. His movements were slow and precise, even stripping away the thin pith around each slice. It was such a gentle scene, yet I felt an inexplicable tension. My mind flashed back to the night we'd reconnected at the bar, to that intense, almost predatory look he'd had in his eyes. By the time I came to my senses, I'd already hung up the call. Henry offered me the orange and asked softly, "Your ex?" I nodded slowly. This time, he didn't comment, just smiled faintly. "Why did you choose him as your boyfriend back then?" "He was good looking, and he loved me." "That's it?" I nodded again. "Sometimes. I just needed a boyfriend to fend off unwanted attention." Henry was silent for a while. After I finished the last slice of orange, he finally spoke. "Could I try? Be your knight in shining armor?" He gave a small, self-deprecating smile. "Even if I'm not your boyfriend." "So, is that how you two got together?" my best friend asked, wide-eyed. "I'm not sure we're actually together." She looked even more surprised. "How can you not know if you're dating or not?" I knew how it sounded, but I tried to explain, "It's just, he's different. He doesn't check my phone, doesn't ask who I'm with," I continued. "Sometimes I even get random texts from guys, and he sees them, but doesn't care." "Not even a little jealous?" I shook my head. "And when we run into his coworkers while we're out, he doesn't introduce me as his girlfriend." "Maybe he's just shy?" she suggested. "But not that shy," I replied. "It's been 2 weeks since that night, and he hasn't even tried holding my hand." "Oh my God, seriously?" She looked utterly shocked. "But he's so good to me, always doing what I need, always there for me. He's practically at my beck and call." "So, what even is this?" she mused. "Does he really think he's your knight in shining armor?" I didn't know how to refute that. "Maybe he just doesn't know how to date," she offered. "This is the guy who's been sending you New Year's greetings every year for 7 years. Does that scream experienced with relationships to you?" "Sometimes I wonder if he even likes me," I admitted. "Oh, he definitely does. He's been doing this for 7 years. She insisted. "Who else would go to that length?" I bit my lip. Then she asked, "Has he ever told you why he likes you?" "For my looks, I guess," I chuckled. "Pretty much every guy I've dated has been attracted to my looks." She looked at me thoughtfully. "What?" I asked. She gave me a knowing look. "You used to complain so much about your exes checking your phone, keeping tabs on you, getting jealous, constantly marking their territory, always a little too touchy." She continued, "Now with Henry, he does none of those things." "And it's still bothering you?" I protested, "It just feels strange." "So, if he started acting that way, would it bother you?" After a moment, I realized, maybe not. Catching the look on my face, she made her decision. "Well then, If he doesn't know how to date, we'll just have to teach him. Teach him how to date? That sounds weird. She raised an eyebrow playfully. Since he's apparently so clueless, should we just ditch him like the others? I thought for a second, then said, no. I think I'll teach him. Just as my best friend and I were brainstorming ways to teach Henry how to date, my phone suddenly pinged with a new message. I opened it, and it was a dinner invitation from a client. But the message just before it was, I really like you. Will you be my girlfriend? Without skipping a beat, my best friend said. Screenshot it and send it to Henry. I couldn't help but admire her suggestion. I love your thinking. Once the screenshot was sent, we both waited eagerly for Henry's response. He replied with just 3 words, what's going on? Recall the message, my friend instructed. Tell him it was sent by mistake and let him figure it out. He won't just ignore it. I followed her advice and soon got Henry's calm reply. Aren't you having dinner with Susan tonight? My friend and I exchanged glances, realizing that Henry wasn't following the usual script. After discussing it, we decided on the final reply, Susan went home. Henry quickly texted back, should I pick you up? We can have dinner together. Sure, I responded. Watching everything unfold, my best friend stroked her chin thoughtfully. I think Henry's game is strong. Why? He didn't outright get jealous. But without making a fuss, he solved the whole thing. I reflected for a moment and realized she was right. So, is he really clueless about dating, or is he just pretending? I'm not sure, my friend said. Let's keep an eye on him. After my friend left, I waited at the mall until 5 p.m. and finally saw Henry. But his timing wasn't ideal. Just as he arrived, I was being approached by a guy. He was relentlessly asking for my contact details. And when I refused, he wouldn't back off, continuing to follow me. When Henry saw me talking to someone, he stopped immediately, clearly aware of the situation. I couldn't help feeling frustrated. At times like this, wouldn't the boyfriend step in and show some possessiveness, maybe put his arm around his girlfriend to mark his territory? I pointed to Henry and said, my boyfriend's here. Only then did the guy give up. Henry approached. And I turned away, starting off with a carefree attitude. At least he knew to chase after me. He tugged at my sleeve and asked urgently, what's wrong? I replied, your girlfriend's being hit on, and you're just standing there. What do you think is wrong? He was silent for a beat, then slowly said, can I? What? Can I tell him you're my girlfriend? Why wouldn't you? I was confused. I already am. He smiled. As if a weight had been lifted. Okay. We walked side by side for a while, and then he asked, what about jealousy? In that instant, I realized what he meant, and replied, it's fine. What about holding hands? He asked, sounding serious. His question made me a little dizzy with thoughts of what might come next. Before making any move, he asked for permission. What would happen if other things came up? I quickly shook off the thoughts and replied seriously, it's fine. Soon, I felt his warm hand, firm but careful. He said, it's my first time holding hands, and I'm a little nervous. If I do anything wrong, please bear with me. My heart fluttered. And I couldn't help but feel confused. Was he really clueless about relationships, or was he just pretending? Henry, the one I'd trained, had improved significantly. Though he still came off a bit awkward in relationships, overall, he had made progress. Everything seemed to be going smoothly. The only hiccup was that Jake had been released from prison. A while back, he had been dating a girl while also pursuing a wealthy woman, and somehow, the rich woman found out. She was furious and used her connections to get him jailed. With a full 15-day detention sentence. 15 days later, Jake was out, and the first thing he did was contact me. Henry was on edge. To protect me from Jake's harassment, I moved into Henry's place, and we started living together. That's when I learned something I hadn't expected. Henry was the grandson of an elderly lady I had once helped Annie. There was even a photo of Henry with his grandmother on his desk at work. When I saw the photo and looked surprised, Henry explained, "I thought you knew." He added, "My grandmother added you to her contacts because of me." I had no memory of this. But I did recall Annie mentioning that her grandson was a very outstanding young man. Henry chuckled. "I guess it makes sense. You must have had so many friend requests." That sudden feeling of being a bit inconsiderate hit me again. But honestly, it wasn't entirely my fault. I was in the student council throughout high school and college, and after starting my job, I had to add many clients. So, I never really rejected friend requests unless they seemed suspicious. If the conversations were genuine, I'd keep them, but if they were filled with nonsense, I'd delete them instantly. Over the years, my contacts remained quite full. That's why Henry's messages, sent over the past 7 years, had been buried in the sea of unread ones. It wasn't that I didn't reply, but there were just too many to keep up with. I decided to return to our previous conversation. "Did Annie ask you to add me?" "No, it was my decision." He said, "Grandma always talked about you, how you'd come to visit her regularly, keep her company, and how kind and patient you were. She praised you so much, and I was curious to know what kind of person you were." I suddenly felt a bit nervous. "Did you feel disappointed when you found out?" He shook his head. "I just didn't expect you to be so beautiful." I immediately picked up on what he was implying. "You didn't like me just because I'm beautiful, did you?" "I liked you first, and then I thought you were beautiful." He smiled at me, saying, "But you really are stunning." In that moment, I realized something important. I had always thought people liked me because of my looks. But Henry wasn't like that. He liked me for my kindness. Henry continued to praise me, recounting all the things I had done for Annie and sincerely thanking me for everything. I suddenly felt guilty because I wasn't as purely kind as he thought. I had selfish motives. He said, "When I was in middle school, I used to visit Grandma often. But I never ran into you. Then I heard Grandma mention you usually went to visit your parents on weekends." I nodded. "My dad remarried, and my mom did too." Henry looked at me silently. I decided to be honest. "I'm not as good as you think. I lived alone in that house, and I'd get scared whenever I heard footsteps in the hallway. So, I'd go to stay with Annie, because when I was with her, she was also there for me. On the surface, it looked like she needed me, but in reality, I needed to be needed by her. I'm afraid that one day, she might kick me out of her home." After my parents remarried, they had their own families and kids. I was like a ball, bounced around from place to place. Even though I visited them every week, I didn't get any real affection from either of them. During those sensitive years of adolescence, I was haunted by one question: am I unnecessary? I didn't want to think that way, but it always lingered in my mind. I eventually started to crave being needed. As long as someone needed me, I could strive to be the best version of myself. Being the center of attention, not being ignored, being indispensable, those things gave me a sense of security. "Why is that so bad?" Henry asked. "You're already more than enough. What more do you need?" I tried to explain. "I didn't help her purely because I'm kind. I'm not as good as you think." It felt like maybe I didn't deserve Henry's pure affection. But he said, "So, does that mean the fact that I started liking you because of how you helped my grandmother doesn't count as pure love?" I was at a loss for words. He pulled me into his arms and placed his warm hand on my head. "There's no such thing as pure or impure. To me, you're simply the best." In that moment, I felt a warmth I had longed for. It was like finally finding water after a long trek in the desert. I wanted to lose myself in his embrace forever. Henry took me to visit Annie one weekend. Annie was still living in that narrow, run-down house. Henry and his family had offered to move her into a new place and take care of her, but she was too attached to the old house and stubbornly refused to leave. So, Henry and his family arranged for a caregiver to look after her, and they visited her regularly. Annie was getting older, and her memory was failing. Her vision was poor, and she had trouble recognizing people. But when her grandson appeared, she still smiled and waved her hands with excitement. She even smiled at me and gently placed Henry's hand on mine. I watched this scene, feeling deeply moved. After leaving Annie's house, Henry and I walked down the narrow alley. Maybe because we were revisiting old ground, I suddenly felt the urge to share something. I pointed at a shabby third-floor apartment and said, I lived there all through middle school. There used to be a big tree out front, and sometimes, at night, the wind would blow the branches against my window, and it would wake me up, frightened. What happened after that? He asked. I moved out. I said. When I was in my first year of high school, my mom decided to have me live with her. At first, I was excited because I really wanted to be with her. But I quickly realized it was worse than being on my own. Didn't you like living with your mom? No, I answered honestly. One time, my stepdad secretly watched me shower, and I caught him. I went to my mom about it, but she defended him, saying it was an accident. After that, I started avoiding that house. I'd rather wander the streets on weekends than go home and feel their fake love. Henry's expression was quiet, as though he was holding back his emotions. That's when I started dating, I continued. I don't really remember the relationships anymore, but I remember how much they liked me, and I just wanted to know what it felt like to be loved like that. Henry asked, did you feel happier once you started dating? Honestly, no. I tried to fill the void inside me with relationships, but no matter how many times I tried, it was never enough. The emptiness was still there, and it could never be filled. But now, it felt like Henry was slowly filling those empty spaces. I looked at him, asking seriously, didn't you ever feel jealous, seeing me go through one boyfriend after another in front of you? He held my hand. His gaze unwavering. Your past doesn't matter to me. As long as your future is with me, that's all I need. I thought to myself, he really gets it. And I was grateful for the casual yes I had given that night. At first, I agreed to be with Henry just to see where it would go, like I had done with others before. But now, I was genuinely thankful I said yes. Henry was incredible. Incredible enough that I was starting to imagine a future with him. After the weekend, Monday came, and I had to go back to work. As the workday neared its end, Henry suddenly messaged me saying that he had something urgent to attend to and couldn't pick me up today. I simply replied, okay. Jake hadn't caused any trouble recently, so I figured he had given up. But Henry, still uneasy, insisted on picking me up every day. It was safe for me to go home alone, though. Jake hadn't bothered me, and I even made a quick stop at the supermarket to pick up some ingredients. I cooked dinner, waiting for Henry to come home. But in the end, Henry didn't come home. Instead, I received a call from the hospital. A strange man's voice urgently said, Henry's been hurt. You need to come to the hospital right away. When I arrived at the hospital, I learned that Henry's injury was entirely Jake's doing. Jake had found out that Henry was my current boyfriend and also discovered that the wealthy woman knew about his double life. So, he decided to settle both old grudges and new ones, showing up at Henry's with a butterfly knife. Henry had been in the middle of a meeting and was caught off guard, which is how he ended up injured. I asked, how bad is it? I'm not sure, but in his panic, he tried to block the blow with his hand, so it shouldn't have hit anything vital, one of Henry's friends explained. He added, that guy's been taken by the police. He'll probably be locked up for a few days. Once we get Henry's injury report, we'll see if we can get him locked up for longer. A wave of confusion washed over me. I felt guilty, self-blaming, and full of regret. How could I have been so blind? How could I have ever ended up with someone like Jake? The time spent waiting outside the emergency room was unbearable. Even though Henry's friends kept telling me that it wasn't my fault, I couldn't help but feel responsible. How could it not be my fault? My ex-boyfriend hurt someone, and my current boyfriend got hurt. It was all connected to me. Finally, the doctor came out and gave a brief update. The wounds have been treated. The stab wound to his chest was the deepest, and we're concerned it might have damaged his lung. It's best to keep him in for observation for the next 2 days. I nodded numbly. Henry's friends went to handle the hospitalization paperwork, but before they left, one of them turned to Henry and said, "Vanessa feels really guilty. You should comfort her." Henry was sitting in a wheelchair when I saw him, his face a little pale, his arm wrapped in bandages. But he was smiling at me, his voice gentle, "I'm fine." The more he said that, the more I wanted to cry. My eyes scanned his injuries, one on his arm, one on his chest, and another on his waist. I asked, "Does it hurt?" He shook his head. "No, it doesn't hurt." I didn't believe him. He added, "I hit him too. I kicked him to the ground. I'm strong, so don't cry." His voice faltered, filled with panic. I didn't want to cry, but it was impossible to hold it back. I sniffled and knelt down beside his wheelchair, apologizing earnestly, "I'm so sorry. This is all my fault." "What does this have to do with you?" Henry said, surprisingly serious. "Are you saying you told him to hurt me, or that you could have stopped him?" "He's just a crazy person. You can't blame yourself for what a crazy person does." I couldn't accept that. My thoughts were in turmoil, completely out of my control. Henry finally said, "Then it's my fault. I'm useless for getting hurt and making you worry." I shot him a look, irritated. He said, "So don't blame yourself. I'd rather you blame me." "Why are you so good to me?" I whispered. "Why shouldn't I be good to you?" He said seriously, "You deserve all the good in the world." Since Henry had to stay in the hospital, he needed a few essentials. Mike, one of his friends, kindly drove me back to my place to collect them. I packed up everything Henry would need, and just before I left, I saw the cold food sitting on the dining table. I heated it up and took it with me. The atmosphere in the car was tense. Maybe to break the silence, Mike decided to speak up. "If Henry knew you were sitting in the passenger seat with me, he'd be so jealous." I was a little confused. "He doesn't get jealous." "How could he not?" Mike said, surprised. "He's the most jealous person I know." I wasn't so sure. Are we talking about the same Henry? The one who doesn't care that I date one boyfriend after another? Mike shrugged. "Okay. Let me put it this way. Henry has a document where he keeps track of all your exes, everything from their star signs, blood types, birthdays, even their strengths and weaknesses. He compares them to himself in the most detailed way possible, like a product analysis." I was speechless. Mike continued, "Sometimes he'll send me a picture and ask, 'What's this guy better at than me?'" I was still in disbelief. Did Henry get jealous because I taught him to? Mike saw my reaction and winked. "Vanessa, you really didn't know? Henry hides it well, doesn't he?" "Why would he hide it?" Mike immediately fell quiet. "I'm not saying anything else. If you really want to know, you'll have to ask him directly." When we finally got to the hospital, I could see Henry eyeing me with suspicion. Mike quickly made himself scarce. Henry was sitting up in his bed eating the late dinner. He looked at me and asked, "What's wrong? Did Mike say anything to you?" I decided to test him. "Do you remember that guy we met at the Miller restaurant? My ex?" He nodded. "He just contacted me. He said his dad's the head of the hospital, and if we need anything, he's willing to help us." Henry immediately replied, "His dad's not the head of the hospital." "How do you know that?" Henry went silent. I pressed on. "I also heard you have a document about all my exes. Is that true?" He stayed silent again. "You really know everything about them?" Still no answer. "Well, if you're not answering, I'm taking that as a yes." He coughed a couple of times, then asked, "Did Mike tell you that? Why are you hiding it? If it bothers you, you can just tell me." He shook his head. "It's not that it bothers me, I just want to know where I fall short compared to them. They're not better than you. You're the best." He smiled, pleased. I asked again, "Why don't you just tell me when you're jealous?" Once again, he stayed silent. "Is it that hard to answer?" After a long pause, he finally admitted, "You had an ex who was so jealous. You broke up with him." "That's because he was overly jealous." Henry murmured, "I get overly jealous too." Then he quickly added, "But I can keep it to myself and pretend I'm not." I laughed. "You don't have to. You're not like him." He brightened up, then added, "You also had an ex who was so clingy, you broke up with him. You can be clingy." I looked at him carefully, finally understanding why he hid it all. He was afraid I'd break up with him. I leaned against his shoulder and said seriously, "You can be whoever you want to be. You can do whatever you want. I won't leave you. I promised, as long as you need me, I'll stay." Henry stayed quiet for a long time. Then, his hand slowly crept around my waist and held me tightly. His warm breath brushed against my ear as he whispered, "Do you know how jealous I get when I see you with one boyfriend after another?" He buried his face in my neck, his voice low and husky. I was going crazy. Henry's clingy side really caught me off guard. It was understandable when he was clingy at the hospital, considering his limited mobility. But after he was discharged, he remained just as clingy. Especially when we got home. He didn't want to be apart from me for even a second. I couldn't help but be surprised by the sheer level of it. Can someone really be this clingy? Doesn't he ever get tired of it? But Henry proved through his actions that yes, he could be this clingy, and no, he never tired of it. He was clingy at home, and clingy when we went out. One time, I simply went out for a shopping trip with my best friend, and his call came right after. This time, he was a bit more subtle, not directly asking when I'd be home, but inquiring about dinner and whether he should pick me up. I patiently answered him, and after hanging up, my best friend couldn't hold back her laughter. She draped her arm over my shoulder, teasing, "Looks like our big beauty Vanessa's finally fallen for it." "You're exaggerating." I tried to keep up my composure. She continued laughing. "But weren't you always the one who hated this? Anyone who interrupted your shopping trip was automatically on your bad side." "Henry's different," I defended him. "Different? How?" she asked. I didn't have the words to explain, but he just felt different. Wow, looks like Henry truly excels. He doesn't act unless he absolutely has to. When he does, it's a total surprise. My best friend sighed, and I laughed, "You're impossible." That day, Henry still came to pick me up. Actually, after Jake was released from prison, his dad took him back to their hometown, and I probably wouldn't see him again. But Henry still insisted on picking me up and dropping me off. As soon as we walked through the door, Henry pulled me into his arms from behind, sounding utterly wronged. "You only spoke 13 words to me today." I didn't count, but I felt like it was more than that. He quickly added, "The phone call doesn't count." I had no idea how to respond, so I patiently asked, "What do you want me to do?" "You could kiss me 13 times, that'd make me feel better," he said, pulling me around to face him. His actions were assertive, but his eyes looked so pitiful. I stared at his handsome face, unsure where to begin. Suddenly, he changed his mind. 13 kisses might be too much. If you don't want to, just one kiss will do. His humble demeanor really tugged at my heart. I kissed him all over his face in a rush, and by the end, I couldn't help but laugh. "When I first met you, I never imagined you'd be this clingy." He had this cold, aloof aura, yet once we started dating, he seemed like a completely different person. He said, "If you don't like it, I can pretend not to be clingy." I couldn't handle it, no. "Stay clingy." It's fine. Henry held me tighter, swaying slightly, then spoke his heart. I don't feel secure. All your exes were dumped by you for various reasons. I'm scared one day you'll dump me too. You won't. I won't break up with you. I know, he said. But I just don't feel secure. His voice was full of vulnerability and defeat. I couldn't stand hearing him like that, and after thinking for a moment, I came up with a solution. How about we get married? I looked him in the eyes. Marriage. Will that make you feel secure? Henry was quiet for a long time, then nodded firmly. Okay. The day we went to apply for our marriage certificate, the weather was perfect. It hadn't even been an hour from entering the marriage registration office to coming out. But the nature of my relationship with Henry had already changed dramatically. He held my hand tightly the entire time, even as we got in the car. His eyes were fixed on me. I sat in the passenger seat, waiting and waiting, until I couldn't help myself anymore and asked, "Baby, aren't we going?" He turned to look at me in surprise, staring for a long while, before his lips slowly curled into a smile that spread across his face. He rubbed his cheek, seemingly trying to shake himself awake, and said, "Wait a second, I need to post something on Instagram." Then, with hesitation and a shy smile, he called out, "My dear wife." I felt a jolt run through me. Henry took a photo, added a caption, and posted his very first Instagram moment. Henry, reached the top. I asked, "What does that mean?" Henry replied, "It means we'll see even better views together in the future." I had a feeling there was a deeper meaning there, but I couldn't quite figure it out, so I decided to just follow his lead. After posting, Henry got a flood of likes and comments from his friends. He sat in the car, scrolling through the messages with a huge grin, and kept at it for half an hour. I was worried it would get dark if we kept waiting, so I couldn't resist pouting, "Baby, I'm hungry. Let's go eat." Okay, Henry finally looked away from his phone, gazing at me with tenderness. "What do you want to eat?" "Anything is fine." After what felt like forever, the car finally started moving. The beautiful sunset bathed the sky in color, and beside me was the person I loved. Henry was driving me toward a new chapter in our journey together. The end.